Hello, my name's Guy Armstrong. I'm the author and publisher of this book, How Essential is Fluoride? If you like my work, you can find it there on my Substack and my Facebook. Here's what the book looks like. It's just over 500 pages, including introduction, references, and appendices. The book is quite unique. It's about the way in which many advocates of water fluoridation in the USA, Australia, and New Zealand have consistently claimed in public media fluoride to be an essential nutrient, or fluorine to be an essential element, regardless of what is published in the scientific literature. So a little background is necessary here. When scientists are testing if an element or compound is essential, they will normally deprive animals of this element or compound while doing their best to ensure an abundance of other factors believed necessary and ascertain if a deficiency state can exist. And chapter 1 of the book contains many experiments that were done along these lines with fluoride. In fact, to my knowledge, my work is the most in-depth appraisal of this topic in the world in the English language that I'm aware of. And just if you're wondering, I believe most people involved in promoting fluoridation have good intentions, but the way some aspects of science are highlighted and some aspects are downplayed, often I think more out of competition than deliberate dishonesty, means that even the expert promoters get a distorted view of information. So I only give a couple of examples of definite dishonesty in the book. Anyway, this video is about chapter 4 of this book, which is called How Abundant is Fluoride in Food, and it basically demonstrates one of the observations made by many scientists discussed in chapter 1. The observation being that all the researchers found it incredibly difficult to make diets low enough in fluoride to even test if a deficiency state for fluoride could even exist. This is an incredible fact when you compare the scientific literature with expert claims in media, because in media so much talk is about how we're all getting tooth decay because we're deficient in fluoride and we need community water fluoridation, or CWF as it's abbreviated to fix up the fluoride deficient water. Now, at the start of the chapter, I quoted a couple of New Zealanders who've advocated the fluoridation of community water supplies, one of them being Dr. Jonathan Broadbent of Otago University, who claimed in the New Zealand Herald in 2013 that the World Health Organization, the World Dental Federation, and the International Association for Dental Research have all stated that universal access to fluoride for dental health is part of the basic human right to health. And the other person I quoted is Harold Bertram Turbot, who died in 1988. He was one of the principal supporters of CWF in New Zealand back in the 1950s. And he said, "I do not want to appear facetious, but the only way of avoiding fluoride in the diet is not to eat." Here's the original document. It's a letter to the New Zealand Citizens Vigilance Association, and Turbot was sharing some of his knowledge. Well, I thought this was a good example of contradiction in expert writing. Here are some of the statements regarding the difficulty of reducing fluoride concentrations in food. These are taken from the deprivation experiments discussed in chapter 1. The first is the 1933 experiment by Sharpless and McCollum. They write that fluorine is apparently universally present in plant and animal tissues. The question is still unanswered as to whether the element plays a physiological role or is present in the tissues as an accidental constituent, because it is ingested in all foods. In their 1925 experiment cited by the nutrition researcher Dr. Muriel Bell, McCollum and his co-workers cited 11 studies that examined fluorine's presence in a variety of plants, meats, waters, and animals. Some of the measuring techniques are probably imprecise by today's standards. However, the abundance was noted. They claimed it is evident from these studies that fluorine is found in nearly all food materials and accumulates in the body tissues. I'll stress the words nearly all. In 1939, Robert Evans and Paul Phillips from the biochemistry department at the University of Wisconsin cited 5 studies from 1888 to 1937 in their introduction that related to low fluorine diets. Not a single one had 0.00 part per million fluorine. In 1954, Dr. Joseph Mueller, dentist and professor of biochemistry, a developer of Crest toothpaste from Indiana University, discussed his experiment on bone retention. He stated that one of the primary objectives of this study was the preparation of a diet totally devoid of fluorine. However, even with exceptionally careful purification, the diet still contained traces. Although the actual amount of fluorine was so low as to make an accurate estimate impossible, it is known that some fluorine must have been present since fluorine was recovered in the skeleton. By traces he meant less than 0.1 microgram per gram or 0.1 part per million. In their 1957 experiment, Richard Maurer and Harry Day from the chemistry department of Indiana University said, "Fluorine occurs naturally in virtually all foods and drinking water, and it is present in the bodies of all higher animals." I should add that these two, along with Joseph Mueller, are very prominent in the toothpaste industry from the 1950s onwards. Takayo Suzuki from the Department of Hygiene at the Tokyo Dental College in 1969 called a basal diet containing 0.45 part per million fluoride defluoridated feed. In the 1970 World Health Organization monograph Fluorides and Human Health, Dr. Joseph Mueller wrote, "Almost every known food and water supply contains traces of fluorides, since fluorine is one of the more abundant elements in the Earth's crust. The amount of fluorides in foods is of utmost significance, since the combined ingestion of fluorine-containing water, fluoridated dentifrices, and high fluoride foods may be either a useful or a harmful nutritional practice. Care needs to be exercised in avoiding the constant use of high fluoride foods or the ingestion of fluoride from sources not proved important to dental health. The fact that outliers exist regarding fluoride concentrations in food makes looking at total intake difficult. So sometimes you get foods with less than 1 ppm part per million. Occasionally there's the odd food with 0 ppm, but this of course is probably due to the difficulty in measuring very low concentrations and the fact that many analyses only use 2 decimal figures. The World Health Organization in 1970 cited Frank McClure's work from 1949 with regard to fluoride levels in foods. This is McClure's 1949 work cited in 1970 by the World Health Organization. The January 1970 issue of the Journal of the International Society for Fluoride Research was a themed issue wherein it contained about 10 studies relating to fluoride absorption, accumulation in crops, and daily intake. The editorial of this issue cites a study on fluoride levels in food by Professor G. Bredeman of Hamburg. It throws a spanner in the works by saying that fluoride levels vary even from sample to sample in the same batch. This kind of makes sense to me, as when I did my biology degree, one of the most consistent statements from just about all of the lecturers was that the cell is a constantly dynamic form and things within and about it are always changing. So the editorial notes that McClure estimated in 1949 the daily fluoride intake from a typical diet at 0.25 to 0.3 milligrams, but also claims that McClure's figures no longer apply, citing the work of Canadian environmental scientists Maria and Rose, who put the possible daily intake as high as 2 milligrams, and a German researcher who offered the estimation of between 0.3 to 0.4 milligrams per day, but under certain conditions, possibly rising to 2 milligrams and even more. Of course, this implies that the 1970 World Health Organization document was a little outdated the same year of its publication, which is kind of funny. Now, when we look at the New Zealand media in the early 1970s, the newspapers are glowing about this publication. This 1970 publication gave the promoters and journalists an extra reason in their minds to advocate community water fluoridation. For example, New Zealand fluoridation advocate Dr. Tom Ludwig spoke to the New Zealand media, who said Dr. Ludwig bolsters his arguments with a massive and detailed study by the World Health Organization published in 1970, in which 18 experts, including himself and Dr. Muriel Bell of New Zealand, reviewed all the present scientific knowledge of fluoridation. The word present is a little funny because the amounts cited for the estimated daily intake of fluoride in drinking water by Dr. Ludwig and Dr. Bell was from Frank McClure's even earlier research, the year 1943. The only criticisms I've seen of the 1970 WHO monograph are Dr. Cuttress's review in the New Zealand Dental Journal that I've discussed elsewhere, wherein he lauds everything in the document except for Ericsson's statement about fluoride being essential at the beginning, and of course this observation by the Journal of the ISFR that McClure's figures were out of date. The 1970 World Health Organization document is an interesting document for its American influence. So you look at what I discuss in Chapter 2 of my book. This documents articles on the question of fluoride's essentiality, and all of the deprivation experiments discussed are American, and there's no discussion on that excess of American research and lack of research from other countries, which is perfectly normal for official documents. The 2 scientists who discuss the deprivation experiments are also America-based, but look at the other authors, 27 in total, and the 93 reviewers of the document. They're from all around the world. Just reading from the list of reviewers, their countries of origin are Canada, Ireland, Bulgaria, Egypt, Switzerland, USA, India, Sweden, USA, Colombia, New Zealand, Argentina, France, Venezuela, USA. So there's a whole mix there. That's just the first 15 reviewers. Doctors Ludwig and Bell were from New Zealand, but they were both hugely influenced by American researchers, such that their opinions, knowledge, and areas of ignorance and bias are basically identical to the American researchers. Well, looking at McClure's 1949 work, he used some of his own analyses and work from other people. Out of a total of 41 studies, 2 were German, 3 were from China, 1 was from South Africa, the other 35 were American. So we look to the World Health Organization and find American research, or predominantly American research. That's partly why there's a big America on the front cover of my book. There's something else here related to the year 1970 that's rather incredible. In 1977, the National Academy of Science publication Drinking Water and Health Volume 1 stated that recent studies indicate that the total intake of fluoride is as high as 3 milligrams a day rather than the earlier figure of 1.5 milligrams a day, primarily because of increases in the estimated levels of fluoride in foods. The National Academies cite a study published in the American Journal of Medicine, so this is 6 to 10 times higher than what the WHO in 1970 put it based on McClure's 1949 work. In 1972, Armstrong et al., in discussing works related to theirs, wrote, "Many attempts to demonstrate the dietary essentiality of fluoride have yielded equivocal results, and none of the studies have connected fluoride to a specific metabolic deficiency. Undoubtedly, these studies have been hampered by the ubiquitous occurrence of fluoride in natural foods and waters, with the result that it has been very difficult to prepare a diet devoid of fluoride but nutritionally adequate in all other respects." Fluoridation advocate Dr. Norman Jolliffe of the New York City Health Department claimed in 1956, "Minute traces of fluorides are to be found in practically all foods. It has been said that the only way to avoid fluoride in food is a diet of cabbage, beets, and cauliflower cooked in distilled water." So if you want to avoid fluoride, that's one possible way. Anyway, with regard to the statement at the beginning that universal access to fluoride for dental health is part of the basic human right to health, we already have universal access to fluoride to the point where scientists have never been able to make a reproducible deficiency of the element. The word deficiency has even been used by one CWF advocate stating fluoride is non-essential. This is the 2016 Thinking Green debate between Dr. Mike Berridge and Professor Paul Conant. Dr. Berridge agreed with Professor Conant that fluoride was non-essential, then Dr. Berridge said New Zealand soils and waters are deficient in fluoride. So one way that the experts get around the fact that a deficiency state in human and animal bodies does not exist for fluoride is by claiming that soil and water are deficient in fluorides. And they let the implication that humans can be deficient in fluorine or fluoride just hang in the air without precision. Political scientist Michael Parenti used the phrase the greying of reality, which is what I believe these experts are doing when they make these kind of statements. They just let something untrue stay in the public mind without addressing these contradictions. And I'll add, it's probably done with good intentions. In fact, that's why I think it's so difficult to address. These claims are totally nonsensical because we humans are not harmed by an absence of fluoride. If you want to look a little deeper into this without having to buy or read my book, I have a 3-part article on my Substack about it, which you can find pretty easily. Dr. Berridge's acknowledgement of fluoride's non-essentiality is a deviation from the normal pattern of expert advocates claiming it is essential, yet his use of the term deficient to describe our soils and water is inappropriate. According to this expert, we can be deficient in something non-essential, which is quite ridiculous. This term, fluoride deficient or deficiency, is one of the weirdest, most confusing terms in this entire study because it just means different things in different contexts, and it should never really be used at all. When it is intended to mean that we're harmed by an absence of fluoride, if you look back to what these claims are based on, they're often based on rodent experiments that are unverified, meaning they're carried out by only one group of researchers, or 1 or 2 outlying human studies that look at statistical relationships and not any metabolic pathways or anything relating to molecular biology, and don't demonstrate any actual harm from a lack of fluoride. And just about all the time in the media, they're just empty statements with nothing to back them up, no citation given at all. And to emphasize this, I'll quote the fluoridation advocating European Food Safety Authority, who in 2013 claimed no signs of fluoride deficiency have been identified in humans. and a lack of fluoride intake during development will not alter tooth development, but may result in increased susceptibility of enamel to acid attacks after eruption. However, caries is not a fluoride deficiency disease. This document is cited in Sir Peter Gluckman and Sir David Skegg's 2014 paper, though it's not quoted. The term fluoride deficient appeared in the New Zealand Listener the same year as the publication of the EFSA document, with no correction printed. Neither claim cited any experiment that demonstrated the existence of any fluoride deficiency in humans or even in experimental animals. This lack of foundation is normal when the term deficiency is used in fluoridation, and that kind of makes sense if you think it through. As soon as you introduce an experiment into the mix, people are going to question the method, the sample size, was it verified, and if so, by who? Do the results uphold the conclusions and stuff like this? It's much easier to just have this blanket belief that everyone knows it's a nutrient that we're all deficient in, and anyone who suggests otherwise is a pseudoscientific lunatic or something like that. Dr. Broadbent's statement here that universal access to fluoride for dental health is part of the basic human right to health can be held next to an article he co-authored which described fluoride as ubiquitous in the environment. Regarding concern over fluorine deficiency, which is a totally inappropriate, ridiculous term, allow me to say that even if all the activists alive wanted to take our fluoride away and could be bothered doing so, it would not and could not happen simply because of the abundance of the element. The human race would have to go and live on another planet to avoid fluorine. Those critical of the experts should understand there was seemingly little to explain the poor quality of people's dentition in the 1950s that appeared sensible in academic literature. I actually discuss a lot of research prior to the 1940s that appeared in American dental journals in Chapter 6 of my work that shows there was a lot of impact from all manner of different minerals, oils, and other nutritional components on the teeth of not only animals but humans as well. Removal of sugar was historically considered a good thing, but the responsibility of the public, not politicians or food manufacturers. The well-balanced diet was considered sufficient in every other way, so it was only logical that fluorine was the factor considered missing, leading to poor teeth. This was the picture presented not only to the public but to academics. One example of this assumption that I'm very confident is false. It comes from Colonel J. Fuller, writing in the January 1956 issue of the New Zealand Dental Journal. The severity of dental fluorosis is accentuated if nutritional status is abnormally low, a factor of no relevance in New Zealand. I include this not to focus on dental fluorosis, but on the fact that Fuller's statement is indicative of a belief that the well-balanced diet was abundant enough to render concern about dental fluorosis unnecessary. Well, to be blunt, I disagree with his claim that the well-balanced diet was abundant quite strongly, and I present a multitude of reasons for that in Chapter 6 of my work. Both supporters and opponents of CWF considered the addition of excess refined sugar a harmful thing in the civilized diet. While the experts have considered the junk food industry a threat to public health for a long time, it has certainly taken a while for them to even start discussing the regulation of this industry, with its huge multi-million-dollar advertising campaigns often targeted at the same children the experts wanted healthier. The fact that no conclusive fluorine deficiency has ever been demonstrated in humans has been ignored in mainstream New Zealand media and almost all government literature since the beginning of CWF. Even nowadays, the experts still talk of deficiency, need, and liken fluoridation of water to iodization of salt and the importance of other vital nutrients. Here's the rest of the references from the previous slide. Here's another example of an expert using the word deficiency. It's 10 years old from 2013, if that matters, so if he's changed his mind since then, I apologise. This is Dr. Ken Parrott, a retired chemist based in Hamilton, claiming fluoridation just simply corrects a deficiency by moving the concentration from 0.3 part per million to 0.7 part per million. Note that this is not a concentration in mammalian tissue, this is a concentration in water, and if you drink a different amount of water as someone else, you'll get a different amount of fluoride as someone else. Also note that there's no elaboration on why he kind of disagrees with the Scientific Committee for Health and Environmental Risks or the European Food Safety Authority that have both said there's no such thing as fluoride deficiency. That's totally normal, and yes, that's the entire comment. I say he kind of disagrees because the scientific bodies that I quote in the book are saying there's no deficiency state in human and animal bodies for fluoride, yet the experts advocating water fluoridation talk about the water and soil being deficient, and this is how the expert advocates try to get us to believe the falsity that we're harmed by a lack of fluoride, and how they justify the continual use of the inappropriate term deficient, and that a lack or absence of fluoride is a realistic condition when it's utterly ridiculous because fluoride is so abundant. Another relevant piece of information from the World Health Organization was presented in the 1970 monograph. The following statements are credited to Professor I. Zipkin. Fluoride is a unique ion that it continues to deposit in the calcified structures after the other constituents of bone have already reached a steady state, and thus the major constituents, calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, carbonate, and citrate, reach their maximum concentration early in life and remain essentially unchanged even after administration of large amounts. Zipkin goes on to say that fluoride showed a tenfold increase in bone following ingestion of each of 4 drinking waters with fluoride contents of less than 1, 1, 2.6 and 4.0 part per million respectively. In this way, fluoride behaves differently to the major constituents of bone. I did not find this pointed out in any of the newspaper articles in the 1970s. When you consider Zipkin's claim here that fluoride just keeps on depositing into the calcified tissues, even the slight suggestion that we could be deficient in it is laughable, and I think a very powerful demonstration of expert ignorance. And if you wonder why people don't trust the experts, this is partly why. Sometimes the expert advocates of fluoridation don't know or don't want to know history and say things like fluoridation was never intended to be a remedy for a fluoride deficiency. Making statements like this lets them off the hook, so to speak, when it comes to looking at the work of their peers and engaging in some constructive criticism or public apology, and it helps their lay and educated followers stay ignorant of history. Well, this is the Christchurch Press in New Zealand, September 10th, 1963, announcing the opposite. This is from the New Zealand Dental Association's Hawke's Bay branch. The Hastings water supply is deficient in fluoride, and by adding this element in the form of fluoride, this deficiency is corrected. The purpose of showing these 2 newspaper clippings is to demonstrate that the claim on the American Fluoridation Society website is a denial of historical fact. This headline from 2017 appeared in the Dominion Post, Wellington's newspaper. This article is criticising ignorance and pseudoscience while giving the impression that a deficiency state for fluoride exists, that we do actually need it, which is basically incorrect. And if you want a source here, the recent New Zealand Chief Prime Minister's Science Advisor report said fluoride is not an essential nutrient. This report came out in June of 2021. In March of 2021, a dentist named Adam Durning is quoted in the Whanganui Chronicle as stating that there are only 2 components that make up your teeth, fluoride and calcium, that's it. Of course, there's no correction or skepticism from the media or any other expert advocating fluoridation as to why there's a difference in public media statements and implications versus scientific or professional statements. The following dental roles of other elements and compounds are taken from the 2014 textbook, Modern Nutrition. Protein has roles in tooth size, eruption time, enamel insolubility, and salivary gland function. Vitamin A influences epithelial tissue, tooth morphogenesis, odontoblast or tooth cell differentiation. Deficiencies lead to enamel hyperplasia, underdevelopment. Vitamin D, calcium, and phosphorus are necessary for tooth integrity, eruption patterns, and plasma calcium. Ascorbic acid deficiency leads to dental pulp and dentin changes, odontoblast degeneration, though deficiency is not claimed to result in caries, but no human data were available. Iodine deficiency is claimed to delay tooth eruption, alter growth patterns, and lead to malocclusion, but is not implicated in caries directly. Iron deficiency leads to slow growth, loss of tooth integrity, and salivary gland dysfunction, but no human data were available. The chapter I'm quoting from here is authored by Riva Tolgadeka, Professor Nutritional Sciences, New Jersey Dental School, Diane Regacio-Radler, Associate Professor Nutritional Sciences, University of Medicine and Dentistry, New Jersey, and Dominic P. DePaula, Associate Dean, Academic Affairs, College of Dental Medicine, Nova Southeastern University, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Please compare this with Dr. Durning's statement in the Whanganui Chronicle. Previous slide, the experts can spread misinformation as well as any paranoid conspiracy theorist, and this is the sort of contradiction that my book is about. The bottom line here is that the claim that fluoride is an essential nutrient we can be deficient in has always been a false claim. This is explored in detail in How Essential is Fluoride? The original intended purpose of water fluoridation to correct a non-existent deficiency of fluoride is a false purpose, and always was. Ideally, there should be some form of public apology from the dental associations and government experts who have been misleading the Western public about this for 7 decades. The fact that we have not had one is a reason why so many don't trust the advocates of fluoridation. The fact that the advocates of fluoridation can change a fundamental belief without letting the public know the original experts, many of whom are now dead, had made a mistake or deliberately propagandized, suggests that the current advocates of fluoridation care more about fluoridation than truth or teeth. Thank you so much for watching.